Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Fraad on Capitalism Hits Home, an interpersonal update. This is a show about the intersection of capitalism, class, and our personal lives. Today, I want to talk about a topic that I imagine is on everyone's lips, and that is the coronavirus, what's happening around us and the coronavirus. I'm going to try to touch the psychosocial, economic, political phenomenon that's upon us. How we handle this crisis psychologically, politically, how it's being handled, and also economically, what's happening with this virus. Because this is a crisis that truly luridly highlights the interdependence of our psychological well-being, our political system, and our economy. I'll try to cover each area and show how they intersect. First, I want to talk about the psychological. Then I'll talk about the political and economic areas as well. I hear more about the psychological area from my clients. COVID drastically affects our psychology. It totally affects the routines of our daily lives. And these routines are like cords, cables that hold up our lives. They hold our lives together. They form the structure of every day. We might wake up, exercise, go to work, come home, make dinner, relax, do chores. If we have children, we wake them, we get them ready to go to school. If people are living alone, they get ready for work, they go to work, and then after work, they hang out with each other so that they have company. Now we can't go to a gym to exercise. We can't see friends. We can't even leave our homes, most of us. We're isolated from our work lives, from our colleagues, and from our friends. We can't go out to coffee. We can't go to a restaurant. We can't invite people over without imperiling them or being imperiled by them. We do have the internet, and yet research shows that the brain has to work much harder to communicate on the internet, which is really not the same as interpersonal communication. If you look in another person's eyes and you feel their body tension and you get all the sensory motor cues that another person's presence gives you, you have a very different experience from what you have on the net, which is why so many people on the net get away with lying, because they don't have the real cues of the person in front of them who knows where they live, who has a sense of their patterns, who picks up their body tension. We're even deprived of the most casual conversations, saying something to somebody at a stoplight or at a grocery store line or anywhere else. We have to remain at least 6 feet apart from all other people except those who live with us. We wear masks and gloves to protect us from other people. Even grocery shopping is perilous. You have to dash into the store armed with your list so you don't spend much time there. You wear a mask and gloves to protect yourself from the other people there. You can't afford a leisurely look at what looks fresh or risk asking a store person where's an item you're interested in or whether they even stock it. Everything we touch in that store could be contaminated. Other people, instead of being people that we could communicate with or people that we could remark on, become a source of contamination and potential death. Somebody with corona might have sneezed or coughed and breathed in the air that you're occupying in that store. You've got to keep your distance. The person who wheels her stroller right next to you, unmindful, may be contaminated with corona. Her child may be a carrier too. Feels unsafe. All the routines work, exercise, socializing, going out for coffee, they're all forbidden now. We're held captive at home, fearing a dangerous world outside where we used to function. It's easy in this homebound existence to regress back into childhood, because in childhood we also usually didn't have any sense of what was happening. We feel powerless to even understand, no less control, what is coming down now. Everyone's frightened. Our fate is unknown. Who will get sick? We are as invisible to our powerful leaders as many people were invisible to their parents and caregivers, where we were walk-ons in their own psychodrama, hardly existing as independent humans. Our leaders state strong, positive positions and then contradict themselves the next day or the day after. We don't know where they stand. Like an irrational parent, it doesn't add up and make sense. People go back and they act out the traumas that they felt as children because they go back to their childhoods. We could be tense and fearful and on edge with the people around us who are close to us. We may not even want to know how scared we are. No, let's talk about it. But if you don't talk about what's happening to you psychologically, you act it out, and people are acting out while they're trapped at home. They can snap at each other. They can get angry over trivia that would never have bothered them at all because they're on edge. We're all on edge. Children are underfoot. They too feel trapped. They pick up the anxiety of their parents. They can't go outside and play. They can't go to school. Tensions erupt. Child abuse and wife abuse spike in every recession, in every national tragedy. They're spiking big time now. Battered women can't escape. Men arm themselves to feel control. A lot of controlling men want to control the people around them, and that's where child abuse and wife abuse usually happens because people can't really be controlled. More people bought their first guns in March 2020 than any other time since the FBI started counting. That's a long time. Potential abusers are now even more heavily armed. Emergency room staffs handle the 80,000 yearly gunshot victims, along with COVID-19 victims that crowd their emergency rooms. Most U.S. kids are brought up in overwhelmed families and substandard daycares. We don't have universal quality daycare, after-school care, summer care that other countries give their people. We also don't have parental leaves. Even when the economy was seemingly firing up on all cylinders, childcare was unaffordable in every single state in the United States and in Washington, D.C. Most of our younger children had a routine of being left in childcare centers, which were badly staffed, without adequate play space, but affordable. Now, their shaky, inadequate childcare provisions have disappeared. Their routines are totally disrupted. Older children in the United States, 6 and up, were often left alone because their parents couldn't afford a babysitter and there were no free programs until parents got home. Now the children are home without the structured arrangements they once had. School-age children are all at home, and they're supposed to be taught on computers, whether or not their parents have a computer, whether or not their parents even have a cell phone on which they could use the tiny little computer, whether their parents are still working outside the home, whether their parents could give them any time, or whether their parents have the patience or energy to help them, or even whether their parents speak English. So many children who risked being behind before are now much further behind. And there are precious few provisions to deal with this. Some programs give their kids Chromebooks, little computers to bring home, but they don't guarantee that the parents can help them. Most schools don't do that. Under normal conditions, child abuse goes way down at 6 years old because children are required to be at school at least 6 hours a day and also can go outside and run if their parents become violent. Now they can't. Contact with other children is unsafe. Parents and children are trapped together, and child abuse is spiking. Psychological tensions also mount between couples because most couples don't spend this much time together. A client of mine told me that, except for when they occasionally have gone on a vacation, she's never spent this much time with her husband. And when they went on vacation, they had a lot of distractions and entertainments. She's never been cooped up with him that long. Most couples don't have the skills to talk about the tensions that inevitably come up between them when they're all cooped up together. So they explode. After the coronavirus was contained in China, divorces surged from the people trapped alone with each other for that time. And of course, those in violent relationships now have exaggerated trauma, more abuse. How did this happen? Well, politics play a very powerful role here. They actually play a role of life or death. Strong political forces are part of this plague. And we have to understand our president is immersed like a selfish parent was immersed, but he's immersed in his image overall, not his reality of who he is and what he does, but what he looks like to his Fox News and other viewers. He's also immersed in managing his electoral possibilities and how to please his wealthy donors, how to rescue the stock market, how to financially profit from the disease, which he is doing. And a good example, Trump is telling us to use the drug hydroxychloroquine. Even though that drug is unproven, it has caused at least 11 deaths so far, and it's not recommended by the Centers for Disease Control in the United States. And as a bit of an aside, Trump is trying to cut their funds as he was before this plague. Now we need them more than ever. Now he's trying to cut them to please his political base that doesn't want public money spent. He and his whole family have stakes in that drug, hydroxychloroquine. We're unprotected for a good reason. We are unprotected in this politics of life and death. We're in the middle of an economic crisis as well, a political economic crisis, as well as, of course, a personal one. Fully a third of all young people have lost their jobs, and with them, whatever momentum they had towards a future. More than 10 million Americans, when last I looked, there's probably more now, have lost their jobs this March. Before this happened, before COVID-19, 60% of this country didn't have $400 in case of an emergency. Now they have less. And indeed, The $1,200, the one-time $1,200, Trump agreed to send to everyone, except for the disabled, of course, is not going to change that. Other nations have made different political economic moves. France, Germany, all the Scandinavian countries, New Zealand, etc., send their people between 75 and 80% of the salaries they had at work when they are laid off because of the virus. And that includes people who are waitresses and busboys and other workers who worked primarily for tips, so that they have some security. We have none. This is an ironic moment for those who cite the right to life while they deprive hundreds of thousands of people of life and health. Americans are only 4.25% of the world's population. We now have 22% of the world's coronavirus cases. Our lives are drastically altered, as I said before. They're derailed. We are not tested. We are not tracked. When we're sickened, when we get sick, we're not adequately treated. How come? We are, after all, the richest nation in the world. Well, here are some of the politics behind this. Trump found out in December 2019 about the threat of the coronavirus because China informed the other nations of the world. Trump did nothing. He hid the threat to protect the stock market from going down because he had taken credit for his rise, for the stock market rise, and feared he would lose credit when the stock market fell. He lost valuable time. Americans got sick. We could have been protected. China simultaneously informed everybody, and most countries started to get to work. Countries like South Korea, New Zealand, all the Scandinavian countries, Cuba, etc., they have no new coronavirus cases. The Chinese somehow protected their 1.5 billion people from contagion. The South Koreans protected their 51 million people. Neither China nor South Korea have any new cases. Neither does Cuba, nor New Zealand, nor Austria. These nations immediately issued and enforced orders to their people that they had to be isolated in their homes. The Chinese were very authoritarian about it and welded people's doors closed, and with strong worker protection, delivered necessities to people through their windows. They tested everyone, all the 11 million people in the Wuhan region. They were all tested and then treated as Wuhan was sealed off against contagion. They built 10 temporary hospitals in Wuhan to supplement the hospitals that were already there. Wuhan managed to seal off its 11 million people, test them all, and treat everyone who was sick. Their healthcare workers were well equipped to protect themselves as they treated patients with COVID-19. None, or precious few, died of exposure. The South Koreans, Danish, New Zealanders, Cubans, Austrians, and others did the same, but in a much less authoritarian way than China. Within 1 week, the South Koreans and others tested more people than the U.S. has tested since January 2020. They had enough tests somehow. They're out of harm's way. Why did they protect their people while our government didn't protect Americans? Why were their healthcare workers spared and ours are not? Well, here is where unregulated capitalist profiteering and politics play grisly roles together. Those other nations didn't need to make a profit on the tests or treatments. They bought and used German tests and Chinese tests. They didn't try to develop their own in order to make money. Their only focus was treating the virus, not image, not profit. Those nations all had stockpiled supplies in case of a pandemic. They had masks, they had gloves, they had sterile gowns and shoe covers, as well as adequate ventilators. Our president, even now, is wielding political power against the governors of states who oppose him. He sent California broken ventilators. He wouldn't send New York any ventilators because he thought New York had already enough, even though New Yorkers were the epicenter of the virus. He sent New York and Michigan masks with dry rot on them. Trump sent all the supplies Florida needed because Florida's governor is Trump's avid fan. Trump withdrew our nation from the U.S. force on pandemics, the Pandemic Commission, which had stockpiles of supplies. He saved the money. Trump dissolved the U.S. Pandemic Commission and got rid of its stockpile, sold it, out of opposition to every initiative, particularly the medical initiatives, but all the initiatives that Obama created. Private companies are not willing to stockpile merchandise that they can't turn over. They make their money in order to sell. Therefore, governments need to protect their people. Other nations stockpiled supplies in case of a pandemic because that's an obvious, practical thing to do. We've had several pandemics in the past, so it's obviously necessary. America lost 770,000 people in what they called the Spanish flu, even though it originated in Kansas in 1918. In recent history, there have been the pandemic of SARS, the severe respiratory syndrome, in 2013, and that's a virus related to the coronavirus. Ebola from 2013 to 2016, Zika, a mosquito-borne virus in 2015, and bouts of Legionnaire's disease from 2009 through 2019. Obviously, pandemics happen, and you need to be prepared. Why were those nations mobilized, and those were not? Why are they so well equipped to protect their healthcare personnel? Because it's rather simple. They stockpiled supplies to protect their population. Here's another place where capitalist profiteering came in and wins, while America loses. Because the coronavirus and our health is shaped by Trump's politics. Trump's followers need to believe in his leadership. They need to believe the authority. No matter what he says, they don't question it. They follow it. Their psychological need to believe without question and to believe what Fox News said shaped the economic, political, and psychological trauma that COVID wrought. The state of Mississippi, followed by Alabama and Louisiana, are most in danger in the future because they followed Trump's orders and did not order people to stay at home. On the one hand, Alabama's governor ordered people to stay at home. On the other, on the same day, he opened the beaches and encouraged people to go to the beach. Each area, whether it's political or psychological or economic, is shaping the other areas. If we look at the economy now, We've had more people applying for unemployment than ever since the Depression. And we don't help people. Trump isn't starting what FDR did. The Civilian Conservation Corps, hiring people at decent wages, the Workers' Progress Association, hiring artists and writers and musicians. All of the things that he did when we had a depression put America back to work. It wasn't go back to work and ignore illness, which is what Trump is suggesting. That's the politics and economics inextricably bound. And those unemployed and desperate people have psychological consequences. That's why Cuomo asked therapists to take on telephone clients and social media clients, because people are desperate, and they're not desperate for nothing. The $1,200 that Trump threw at them is not the same as a rent moratorium, which other nations have declared. $1,200 is not the same as 75 to 80% of your salary every week. Americans will be desperate psychologically as their fortunes leave them desperate. And that's obvious. Even before this happened, Americans were desperate. They were more unemployed than they had been, but their low-wage employment, less than $15 a week in most states, didn't give them the means to live. Now they're more desperate. Now they don't even have those jobs. And the jobs that they do have risk their lives. One of the reasons I think that more Black people have died of this plague than white people is because it is Black people who are pushed onto these low-wage jobs that are terribly dangerous and interact with the public. The person behind the cashier at a supermarket, the person stocking the shelves, the person giving out your takeout burger at a fast food restaurant, the people who are the orderlies and nurses' aides in the hospitals who don't have adequate equipment to protect them. All of these low-wage jobs on which all of us count in order to have a life. They are endangered. And this is an economic thing, not particularly a racial thing, but race and class intersect in the United States. And we are in a crisis that is not only a health crisis because of the politics of the way it's handled, particularly the political, which is so important here. It's an unchecked economic crisis. No one's going to know when this will end because we don't have tests. We don't have treatment that's adequate. We don't have vaccines. And other countries see this differently. Trump has given us a black eye, I shouldn't say a black eye, an injured eye all around the world. There was a German company which is developing a vaccine and is within reach of its success. It had 2 German CEOs and 1 American CEO. The 2 Germans were in the German cities of Frankfurt and Hamburg, and the American was in Boston. The American, with both Pence and Trump, approached the company, which is not worth even $500,000, and offered them $1 billion for the vaccine if they gave it exclusively to Americans. They would have the exclusive design of that vaccine. And luckily, the American CEO was fired, and the German board decided to reject that offer and inform the legislature, which said capitalism has its limits. Part of what the tragedy of what's happening with Corona right now is that our president is profiting. Our hospitals are lost. our preparation is inadequate. And we are in trouble psychologically because our lives are collapsing, physically because our lives are collapsing. We are sickening. We have 22% of the world's cases, and we have the most cases any nation ever had, including China, in one day. And we're unprotected and economically losing, so that we now have an intersecting economic, psychological, and political crisis. What can we do about it? Well, unfortunately, Bernie isn't running, but Americans have to make it clear that we need an honest politics of someone strong enough to have a message. Bernie's message was so strong it shifted the whole dialogue of all the candidates. We need a real leader, someone who is not only involved with his own image and is a follower, but has policies and programs and will make the means to enable them. We should all remember that FDR approached his very wealthy, because he was a wealthy fellow, compatriots, because there was a movement in the United States, because tens and hundreds of thousands of people who are unemployed marched in the streets demanding jobs, because in rural areas, the Iowa militias were hanging judges who condemned family farms, because people, when they were evicted, were moved back in by other people against the sheriff's orders. He said to the people at the top, I will tax you 96.8%, and if I don't, you'd better watch out. There'll be a revolution and you won't have that wealth. And enough of them agreed so that he did it, and that's how he paid for the programs. When they say in the United States, we can't help people, we don't have the money, that's a sick joke. If Jeff Bezos can have at least $139 billion and spend $500 million getting himself into outer space, where I wish he was, but whatever, and where Bloomberg, who ran for mayor and had proposals, has $44 billion, and where we have more billionaires than any other nation in the world, of course we have the money. We just have to redistribute it and get America back to work safely and healed. Thank you. I hope you don't feel hopeless, because we can do this. We'll have to be imaginative about the way we organize, but we can do it. And Bernie isn't gone forever either. So thank you. Glad to communicate with you, even in this very scary time. Thank you for listening. This episode has been brought to you by Democracy at Work. Please support our work. Visit our website at democracyatwork.info.